Hello and welcome. Thank you for attending our first panel of the session. I'm Fiona Brown and I head up AI and machine learning at Detactix, and I get to chair the session today on AI ethics and why should we care. So the session has been very well teed up from our keynote speaker, Manoj. AI ethics, it's an important and relevant topic to our industry and to society. And we are honoured today to have with us an expert panel to share their insight and experience in this area. So in the studio, we have with us Rachel Steenson, who is Market Engagement Manager at Esri. And we have Tim Davison, who is the Chief Technical Officer at Brainwave Bank. And joining us virtually via Zoom, we have Ben Bland, COO of Sensium. We have Jane Sang, Professor of Computer Science at Ulster University. So welcome, everyone. The panel is going to last about 30 minutes, and I've got some questions to ask our panellists. And please feel free to chip in as the discussion progresses. We will also have some questions coming through from our audience as well. So please feel free to send through some questions to ask our panellists here today. So the academic philosopher Mark Zuckerberg has stated that AI ethics is about technological change and its impact then on individual lives. We already see AI and machine learning applied across many diverse sectors, from finance to healthcare. And it will play a significant role in society and in economic transformations. Current and practical concerns revolve around ensuring that this technology benefits individuals and societies. And we've seen a plethora of activity with policymakers and lawmakers working on initiatives, guidelines, policies and laws to address these issues. So to start off our panel, I'm going to ask you, Rachel, then, what are then the ethical and societal issues raised by AI?
Okay, thank you very much. I think probably the biggest one first in terms of impact on society is the labour market. It's certainly the one that most people talk about. Oh, we're going to lose all of our jobs to AI. How, what's going to happen in 5 years, 10 years. So that's got a definite impact in terms of what skills we'll be looking for in the future. But it also has an impact in terms of equality. So is the AI going to be developed in a way, and is it going to ensure equality, or is it going to actually deepen the inequality that already exists in the world? Things that we are concerned about, like privacy, human rights and dignity. So, a few years ago, this idea of having a speaker in our house that listened to our every word would have been anathema to most people. And yet I don't know many people who don't have at least one, or if not two, in their house these days. And then democracy. So, we've seen things like tampering in elections and things going on across the world, using technology, using the likes of AI, and how is that going to affect and really allow citizens of Northern Ireland, of the world, to get engaged and really have a say in what's happening in their countries and across the world. Other things to think about as well, I think, is relationships. We all spend more time on our screens than anyone wants to already with technology. It's the put your phone down, we're having dinner now. Those sort of conversations are already happening across the world. Well, what happens with AI? If AI starts replacing those human interactions that we would have had normally with a doctor, or with finance, or with maybe a lawyer down the line, I don't need to see somebody face to face. How do I start to build those relationships? How do we have those relationships? How do they change over time? Other things to think about is, and I think it came up in the keynote, is around the legal system, and we're already seeing that type of technology, AI, being used to look at sentencing, and we've already seen issues with that in America. And I think for me, AI is something that it's global, and you see with what's going on right now with Black Lives Matter that it may have started in America, but it's global now, and there's that global consciousness that we have, and how are we going to ensure that if something happens in AI that is negative, how does that affect the rest of the world? And very quickly, as we now see with social media, everybody in the world can get involved, and we're seeing more and more are getting involved in these type of issues. And then the sort of probably going on to like winners and losers. Yeah. You know, we have the big tech giants out there that are already, you know, doing an awful lot, investing a lot. We have criminals. So we have the people who are taking advantage of it with the fake news, with the news bots, with, as I said, the election tampering. But we could be winners as a society. What if we suddenly have more time to enjoy life? We don't have to be in the office. None of us are in the office right now. Mm-hmm. But, you know, that 37.5-hour week or the 40, 60-hour week that some of us are working, maybe that doesn't need to happen anymore. And also things like better health diagnosis. So we might be living longer. We might be living healthier lives. Losers then, access to education. You know, those that don't have that access, if they need to retrain, how are they going to retrain and get those skills that are necessary? If they don't have the time or the money. Lower income families, minorities and women, we've seen already are losing out in some AI.
Thanks. That was great. Thank you, Rachel. Yeah. I'm going to go to Ben, our virtual panelist. Do you have anything to add, maybe, Ben, to what Rachel had discussed?
Sure, thank you. I'll be very brief because I think Rachel did a great job of explaining what a lot of the potential impacts are. But I think underlying what can cause those impacts, a lot of what we talk about as AI, I mean, it's a sort of misused term in some ways, I suppose, but a lot of it comes down to the predictive power and the decision making involved. So, you know, algorithms are essentially making decisions about whatever's been put in front of them. And that immediately, therefore, raises issues of agency and freedom for the person being impacted by it, because, you know, a decision is being made on their behalf. And so I think that's where we could start to isolate the AI ethics problem from just sort of general technology ethics and ethics in general. And, you know, there's a responsibility required for recognizing where that agency has been taken away from people, you know, because it can then lead on to all kinds of impacts, a lot of time unforeseen impacts like, you know, mental well-being and such like. And drive a lot of negative results. So there's a responsibility there. So I think that agency element is big in this. And then the results of that can end up, as Rachel pointed out, you can have inequality or equality issues that are either amplified or attenuated, either driving like huge inequality where a handful of companies, for instance, and maybe a couple of oppressive governments have all the power and nobody else has it, or the opposite, where we work in communion with our machines and are able to free ourselves from a lot of challenges of time and well-being and so on. So yeah, I don't know, it's a very, very broad response, but hopefully that feeds into the conversation.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm happy to also, it's good to hear this, and Ben and Rachel have said some very interesting things about the consequences and who can win and who can lose. Yeah. And I think the goal is for us to shift that bias to winners and losers, and perhaps to have those winners being more of the population and the people than the governments and organizations. When I think of AI and ethics, AI is built on data and algorithms, and we've been spending years working to develop these algorithms, and they themselves are intrinsically not biased. But the data that we collect is often biased, right? And with any system, computerized system, and many other, anything else basically in life, if you have the incorrect or biased information going in, you'll get garbage out. And so bias in, bias out, and there's potentially a risk for bias in and bigotry out. So if you take a very small and selective data set and train an algorithm, it can do wonderful things in that data set, but won't be able to generalize outside of that. And the consequences are very broad, especially if they're being used to make policy decisions or decisions on individuals' lives or medical diagnostics, which are, it's fundamental that they are using the right data for the right population and hopefully for the entire population.
And I think what you say, Tim, on the data and the biases, maybe this is a good conversation to be having now, because the bias already exists out there, and this conversation is sort of bringing that to the fore then as well. So then, Jane, I'm going to ask you the question: should then AI have built-in ethical constraints, and if so, how do we determine these ethical constraints?
Yeah, I think that's people trying to do now is trying to look at a big debate of the AI ethical constraint. Can we build in? I think one is should we and can we? I think should would be people say yes, if we could, we should. But how do we do this? And one thing we talk about the team and the keynote, they all talk about the bias. So data is biased and algorithm, etc. could be then be biased. But don't forget, when we design the system, the AI system, they are created by humans. Yeah, because human could be biased as well. Now, how could we add those constraints to the AI when we build it? I think that would be, I think that should look at different aspects of the ethics. Some we can build that in, and we can create some laws for the AI system to follow. There's a big, different companies and different organizations that were trying to do this. But on the other thing is, there are some constraints. It's hard to build that in. And I think the key thing is now, especially from academic point of view, the key thing is now when we have an AI system, before the AI system is put into the market, or before an AI research paper or an AI research is carried out or published, should we have then a set of process to check if the AI system or the algorithms are compliant with the ethics?
Yes, and I suppose it's saying, setting what those ethics and guidelines are. Where does that come from?
Yeah.
Anything to add to that?
Yeah. So I'm going to jump in. So I'm not an expert in ethics by any stretch of the imagination. So I did a little bit of reading in preparation coming into this. So, ethics are based on some fundamental pillars of duty, virtue, and consequence. And of those, two of those three are actually based on the foundations of morals, which is basically probably about a dozen different contrasting agents that sit together and are imbalanced. And so it's you look at the good and the bad and various other aspects, and everyone has their own moral compass. Humanity over many years has been fighting with the challenges of setting these compasses and what defines what is ethical and moral today. It's very different than it might have been 500 years ago or 500 years in the future, 50 years from now. Our children may look at us as savages for having eaten meat. Who knows? And then there's the regional differences, and it's quite difficult to try and bring this together to say, well, should we be setting these rules? There might be some basic aspects that we can measure to look at extreme biases, but at the end of the day, those foundations are based on concepts of emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is perhaps something where we need emotional intelligent agents working together with the artificial intelligent agents, coming together, both of them being artificial systems which will develop and govern their own rules in that space. And, if we've had such a hard time over thousands of years of trying to come to what is an ethical outcome or moral outcome, it would be very difficult to think that we might be the right people or agents to set those for the computers.
Rachel, do you have anything to add?
I totally agree with the other panellists that, we should have constraints. I think, as you say, the difficulty is who makes that decision about what the ethics are. I think that it can't just be one person or one body or one organisation. I think it has to be a collective. I think that you have to get a cross-section of society. The teams should be diverse. All the sort of standard things that we would talk about. Part of that sort of, a couple of examples, autonomous vehicles. Well, at the minute, they don't need any licensing, but I need a licence to get into a car and drive. You have doctors who have done 8 years of training, who are licensed to practice medicine, who have had ethical training, and they're already taking medical advice from AI, but that AI was developed by, some might say, a professional, an IT professional. Do they have a professional qualification? Are they a part of a professional body? Have they gone through any ethical training themselves? So where's the licensing or the testing of that? Because, at the end of the day, what we're developing as a company, a company's developing technology, why are they developing it? Are they looking at it from an ethical standpoint, or is it, well, this is going to make us money, this is going to create jobs for us, so it's that element of taking a step back and being involved right at the beginning of the process, I think.
That actually leads us into the question. So we have many different countries, many initiatives, many different heads grappling with AI, coming out with their own proposals and their own ethical considerations. So you've got the UK Office for Artificial Intelligence, you have the EU High-Level Expert Group, you have China's National AI Strategy, and then you have research into the governance and ethics of AI from, say, Stanford and Cambridge and so on. So we've got many different players coming forward with proposals and guidelines and so on. So should we be thinking of this as a universal ethics? Maybe ask that one to Ben. Should ethics then be considered universal in terms of AI?
Thank you. I think one way to look at this, and I should say I'm no expert in ethics either. I'm no expert in technology either, but I'm lucky enough to be involved in various spaces and see what other people are doing and sort of gather that together. And what I see in particular is this sort of dichotomy between the attempts to globalize and universalize ethics and ethical norms and standards and so on, which I think is very important, especially when you consider that companies and technology and even social groups and whatnot are very globalized now. So, national boundaries that sort of don't necessarily have that much relevance. While on the other hand, at the sort of very opposite end of the scale would be trying to individualize to people's own, individual sort of identity and needs and so on. So those two things can contradict each other, I suppose, and so there's a big challenge there. But there are groups, we work as with the IEEE, for instance, in trying to develop global standards for ethics that work across a global consensus group, and there are definitely sort of cultural differences that we have to consider, but we can get some way towards levels that are standardized and global and universal. But we do also put some level of that back onto the people adopting the standard to say, you need to express where you're coming from ethically here, because we can't tell you what's right or wrong. There is no single framework of ethics that has been, I think, universally accepted by anyone. And lastly, I'd add that we've also seen, I think there's an opportunity here. Like, for instance, I can't remember the actual software, but Microsoft was cited as an example of going some way to building a tool where they set the standards, the ethical standards, so things like privacy settings in this sort of tool, at what they felt was a high standard globally, and then disseminated the product around the world. So if you take that kind of attitude, you are attempting at least to say, right, here's the gold standard that works for everybody. And by deploying systems like that, then they actually can be beneficial to the user as well as to the company, because they're easier to develop and to update and so on. There are issues with that, but I think that's a sort of practical approach that companies can take.
Thanks, Ben. And I see you nodding along there, Tim, as well.
I think a key thing there is that, universally we can have some overall rules, but you need to think locally, because as we know that our ethics and moral are geographically constrained as well. So making sure that there's the opportunity to reflect on how it is. You don't want to impose a system across the world. The basics, if everyone can agree on the basics, and then having the local ones adjustable, I think is sort of a first step, and hopefully we'll all move towards a normative reference that will be consistent for everyone.
And this then leads me on for the next question. And Jane, we've got Jane from Ulster University here. So Jane, what then role does education play in ethics? So I'm a computer scientist by background, and I've had to educate myself in ethics and in AI as well. And So I'd be interested in your opinion on that, Jane, and within courses teaching the next cohort of application creators, is that taken into consideration?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because in recent years, AI ethics has been such a hot topic, and even in our curriculum design, in the modules, it's become so important. And I think, as the keynote said earlier, that supporting education, promoting, it's really important. So especially, I think one key thing, there are two aspects of AI ethics, in my personal opinion. One is from technology point of view, and machine learning, AI algorithms, system technology point of view. The other one is more from the human ethical, and so privacy or some social impact that area. So in both, I think that's very important for AI and ethics in the education. I think it's very important. We need to let the second or the younger generation people know that what's AI ethics involved. And then we need to let them know the algorithms, the systems we design need to be fairness, no bias, to prevent the way of measuring, preventing the biased decision making. And then also, some trade-off of accuracy, fairness. Actually, the traditional machine learning design, we are already trying to do this when we said and how to do the data sampling, how you make sure you are not overfitting or underfitting. From those traditional way, we have already been doing this, but it wasn't being put into the AI ethics framework before. And now it's more important, because there are some algorithms, some systems release and then get the back. It's, for example, and it's called racist robot or bias AI. And they'll pick up people, and when do the algorithm to do the detection, the data set maybe contains more of female, less male, or more male, less female, or more white, or less, black. I think that some facial recognition and machine learning model or tools we use had those problems because the data chain was biased. So from technology point of view, that's very important. And the other thing is that the third one, I think, for education point of view, it's very important of the privacy and security issue, and because it wasn't an issue 20 years ago when I was student, or even 30 years ago, that people wasn't considered that. But with the rapid development of AI, it's now become more important. So when we develop the system, how to make sure the programmers have that in mind, because bear in mind what I said earlier, those bias AI or bias system, it's all designed by human, by programmers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's that human element that is repeating in the message. And Rachel, from your BCS, British Computer Society role, do you have anything to add on the education side?
Yeah, so BCS, which is the Chartered Institute for IT, that have been working along with the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation. They've been working on develop practical guidance on embedding ethical practice in MSc courses in machine learning and data science. So they've been working with a number of IT companies. They've been working with over 50 universities across the UK. And they've reported some interesting information back to the Office of AI just last year in relation to the interviews they did with the companies, in that the employers are saying that they need diverse interdisciplinary teams that are highly skilled at ethically developing solutions, at being able to talk to business in an ethical way about what it is they're trying to develop, and maximising it right across the business units. So not just saying we're going to do it over here, but everybody needs to be involved. Everybody needs to understand AI, but also they need to understand the ethical implication of AI. So that's been something that's been very good to see coming out from the employers themselves.
Thank you. So I see a question come in from one of our participants online. So is it possible that AI can still introduce bias from training data, even if humans aren't aware of it?
I would say yes. In fact,
Yes.
yeah, the actual process of training the algorithms is very susceptible to introduction of bias. And if you don't do it appropriately and you don't have means by which you're assessing your bias, then it's almost inevitable, I would say. And so it's important to be aware of that and have mechanisms in place and procedures in place to assess bias through your training and your nested cross-validations and ultimately independent validation in a data set that's nothing like the one that it was trained on. That's probably the best way to really understand any bias that you may have introduced.
Yeah.
And I think it's...
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Jane. Go ahead.
Yeah, and then I think it's very important to remember for each machine learning methods when you assess that they have some assumption.
Yes.
And we have the assumption that all the training data we get, it's inclusive. Mm-hmm. But in reality, it's not possible. So ignore human factor. Your machine learning model still introduce bias. You really need to deal with that cleverly so that you can minimize the bias.
Thank you, Jane. So I think we've got about 2 minutes left. So for a closing question then, what advice would you give those currently building AI, ML solutions, and how can we bake in ethics then to the systems that we are developing? I'll maybe go to Ben for that one.
Hiya. Okay, so very quickly then, I guess one positive way to look at this is if you treat this challenge as a kind of design and business challenge, we've talked about putting the human first. Well, a good ethically designed system is likely to be a good product or service system anyway. So, use a participatory design process, collaborate with any stakeholders and a very broad range of them, because there's a lot of things that you wouldn't be able to predict from the very beginning, and try to design things that are built with the user's agency and well-being in mind in the first place, and then you should be on the right path.
Okay, Tim, do you have anything?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, if you're developing products, then you want to be as expansive as possible and inclusionary with all of your stakeholders and people who'll be using the product. So at the end of the day, I think it's just important to make sure that you test your assumptions and test what your outputs are. We have an opportunity and obligation, I think, to do that before we release products into open use.
And it's that even statistical rigor along with the human rigor then as well. And final words to Rachel?
Just, I would say, everybody go and look at the Computer Ethics Institute, 10 Commandments on Computer Ethics, and try to live by that.
Okay, super. So we'll have to put a link up to the computer ethics. Okay. So I want to thank my panelists today for a very interesting discussion. I think we could have went on for many more hours on this, and hopefully we can keep the conversation going. So after the panel now, we are going to take a break. And after the break, we will have Thomas Swan, who is technical architect from Kainos. And Thomas is going to be giving us a talk on integrating ML cloud services. So more of a practical edge to maybe the AI ethics and how that's implemented. Okay, thank you, everyone.